Well, I know you might be surprised when I tell you this, but I have a 13-year-old granddaughter. I know, I started really young. When I say 13, she's actually 13, like kind of going on 20. I remember, well, this was like 4 years ago when she was, how old would she have been then? 9. We were going for a walk and she said, that's my boyfriend. And a few weeks later I said, how's your boyfriend? She said, well, I'm not looking for the perfect man, but he's so immature. I want a mature man, she said. Anyway, as you can imagine, now she's 13, she is really into fashion, big time. And that gets very expensive nowadays. And she was showing me her brand new pair of trainers, which had a designer label on them. And I said, oh, they look lovely, they look really good. She said, yeah, I'm really pleased with them. And I said, are they comfortable? And she said, no, but they're highly fashionable. But fashion is so big, isn't it? It's such a big industry and it drives so many things. And actually with the advent of social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook and X, or what used to be Twitter, it's even bigger now because people want to show how fashionable they are. I was in London once and I just stopped to have a coffee. I was going to a gig at the Royal Albert Hall. I was outside the coffee shop there. And this young lady came and she sat next to me and I thought, excuse me, I'm a married man. She picked up her phone, she looked very fashionable, took a picture of herself and walked off again. And she'd obviously posted it on Instagram. Everyone wants to show you how fashionable they are. Now, I talked to my granddaughter to get a bit of research for this, and she told me some important hashtags. So maybe I'll start using these to show people how fashionable I am. Does anyone know what these are? Anyone know what that is? OOTD. Yes? Outfit of the day, yeah. If you want to get noticed on Instagram or TikTok particularly, you put that hashtag on and people will search that and they will see your outfit for the day. How about this one? Anyone know this one? Someone up there does? Get ready with me. Well done, very good. There's someone else who's fashionable who's with it there. Get ready with me. And this one's a lot easier. This is routine. People go through their routine. And actually all of those are quite similar because the idea is, particularly those last two, is you get ready with me. I take you through my routine in the morning. I don't want to pick on my granddaughter, but it fascinates me because we had sons. So I'm jolly glad we did have sons and not daughters, actually, I have to say. I don't know how I'd cope with all of this. But she tells me she gets up at 6:30 to go to school. And I said, wow, you're really keen. Why'd you get up so early? Well, it takes me that long to get my makeup and my hair right and my clothes right, What about the work? Oh, never mind that. It's looking right, that's the thing. But actually, I think what fuels this is actually what's on social media. You get these videos and these pictures that show people their routine for the day. I Googled a few. There's this young woman here, get ready with me, put the makeup on right. I thought I'd better not follow that this morning. You wouldn't like it if I came in makeup. This is more my style, Get ready with me, Preston's black tie concert. Perhaps I should do that before I go out to a gig, how to look uncool, That I could do a kind of countercultural one, couldn't I? Get ready with me to be uncool. And that was the kind of fashion I've always followed. Now, you may be surprised to know that I've never particularly been a dedicated follower of fashion. In fact, when I was at school, our little group, we were like countercultural. So whatever anyone wore, we wore the opposite. So short hair was popular in those days. There was a lot of what used to be called skinheads. Anyone remember skinheads? Not skinheads in my school. We looked down on them, so we had our hair long, And people used to like to wear these big Oxford bags, they were called. So we wore drain pipes. Whatever they wore, we wear the opposite. We were kind of countercultural. And I think that stuck because I've never followed fashion. I've always kind of done the opposite. And I do choose what I wear. It's usually what's kind of at the top of the pile. But often I'm just, wake Hazel up for a cup of tea and I'm dressed and I've been up a while and she'll say, don't tell me you're going out like that today. And so then she gives me like an alternative wardrobe. But I do make a choice. The choice is, what's at the top of the pile, but I make a choice about what I wear. It's not always the best one. Now, looking out at you this morning, I see a lot of stylish people. And it's clear, lots of you put thought into your appearance. And each day, you'll make a choice to dress according to what you're going to do. You'll wear a different outfit for a wedding than you will do for work. When I wouldn't go dressed like this to take a wedding, I'd actually wear a suit if I can find where it is. You'll dress different for running a marathon than you dress for going out for a meal. So whether you're a dedicated follower of fashion or not, you choose what to wear. You put thought and effort into it. Now imagine if we put the same thought and effort into choosing our attitudes every day. How we react to people, how we treat people, how we interact with them. What would your relationship with your loved ones, your colleagues, your neighbours, your friends, or the awkward people you meet during the day be like if you choose to wear your best self? Now, I'm not saying that you need to kind of put on an act and be like the best projection of yourself you can. I'm saying that you do what we heard in those verses we read to us earlier, that you clothe yourself with compassion and kindness, that you cover yourself with those qualities. That's your best self, because that's the self that God wants you to be. That's an outfit which has the designer label on it, because it's what God's intention for us is through Jesus. And when you do make that choice, I guarantee it will improve your day and the day of everyone you come into contact with. I'll just give you a bit of a kind of trivial example. I've been preparing this all week, and actually that makes you kind of more attentive, because when I meditated on this and studied this and thought about this, I thought, do you know, how often do I clothe myself with compassion and kindness? How often do I have a compassionate and kind attitude, especially when I'm behind the wheel, you know? In my mind, when I'm in the car, that's separate, you know? I'm not a Christian when I'm in the car, you know? I'm not a pastor when I'm in the car. My horn's lost its voice, I think, almost, you know? But I was driving to Chesterfield, and there was a white van man, as usual, breathing out my backside. Not kind of literally, but, you know, the car was right close to me, kind of bumper to bumper. You know, I get really annoyed when people do that. And then I was pulling off towards Chesterfield. He was heading the other way. He went into the other lane, and I thought, and I looked round at him, and I thought, oh, hang on. Compassion and kindness. So I looked round to him, and he was a typical kind of white van man. And if you drive a white van, I'm really sorry about that. I know some of you do. Caroline does, doesn't she? And I looked round to him, and I smiled and gave him the thumbs up. And he turned round and he smiled and gave me the thumbs up. And I drove away thinking, oh, that was rather nice, wasn't it? It could have been very different, and it kind of taught me a lesson. And maybe he told the story and said, you know, there was this guy and he was a terrible driver, but he gave me the thumbs up and he smiled. But it certainly was kind of nice for both of us. I know that's a pretty trivial example, but these things make a difference, not just to us, but to those around us. So we're starting this series, Dressed to Impress. And as a bit of research, I have watched the programme, and I wouldn't particularly recommend. I didn't realise it was a dating show. I thought it was all about wearing clothes. But anyway, I got about a quarter of an hour through it and thought, I've got the flavour of it, that's it. I don't need to watch any more. But it's a great term, dressed to impress. Now, I've got to be up front with you. Actually, we're in a network called the Further Faster Network, and as churches we share material and share ideas. And a lot of this has come from a church that we're really good friends with down in Ipswich called the Forge Church, and they've kindly given us. They made that video we saw, and they've given us their graphics and some material. So a lot of the ideas I'm sharing are from there, but I've kind of brought my own mix into it. But I want to kind of acknowledge my source there. And I want to reassure you something as well. I am not going to give you fashion advice, you know. There was, when I worked in Customs and Excise, it was quite a fun office that we used to live in. They used to have this whoopee cushion, right? This cushion that made it sound like you were breaking wind. And they used to put it under the boss's chair, you know, it was that kind of fun place to be in, you know. But they put out this fake memo, and it looked official, and there was me and a guy called Doug, who obviously weren't the best dressed people in the office, and they said, Simon and Doug would like to welcome you to their fashion show at Lee Tip tonight. And it was hilarious. The other guy didn't think it was funny, but I thought it was hilarious. So don't worry, I'm the last person to give you fashion advice. Maybe you can give me some. But instead, over the next few weeks, I want to give you some helpful instructions from an early Jesus follower by the name of Paul. and he used fashion as a life lesson. I mean, the way we dress has always been important, right through history. And, they had to dress in a certain way. They wore flowing gowns, and religious people would wear sort of things around their neck to show that they were close to God. But the important thing was that they needed to dress to survive the heat. The way they dressed was really important. And so Paul uses this as a picture. And he says, look, the same way you think carefully about your dress, you think about actually, how hot is it today? What's going to keep me the coolest? How am I going to survive this day? What outfit is the one that's right for this? I want you to think the same way about clothing yourselves with attitudes that are right for a Jesus follower. Now, if you're not a Jesus follower, I think you're going to find this helpful as well, because we haven't got the monopoly on this. All of these qualities, I've seen in other people, compassion, kindness, and gentleness, and so on. And you'll find this stuff helpful in your relationships at work, home, and wherever you go. Because, as I've often said, and it's not an original, it's from Andy Stanley, but Christianity makes life better and makes you better at life. And we want to share some of that with you so that you can see more of that and want to know more. But if you are a Jesus follower, this is part and parcel of the Christian life, because we need to clothe ourselves, cover ourselves in the right attitudes, because they're attitudes that reflect Jesus and that honour him. So, come with me to the vibrant city of Colossae that's at the heart of modern-day Turkey. And in particular, to a community of Jesus followers who had a letter from a man named Paul. Now, you might not have heard of Paul if you're not a Jesus follower. You might have heard of St. Paul's Cathedral, which is named after him. But Paul actually wasn't always a Jesus follower. He was an ultra-religious Jew. He hated Christians, and he had this amazing experience where Jesus met with him and gave him a mission to tell others about him. And he became an early Christian leader and reached people right outside the boundaries of Christianity and led them to Jesus. His life took a dramatic change of direction when he met with Jesus. And knowing the difference that Jesus made in his life, and knowing that Jesus had called him to tell others about him, he went all around the known world at that time, the Mediterranean basin, right out into Malta, into the Turkey, into the Middle East. He told people about Jesus, led them to Jesus, and started little Jesus communities. And he didn't just leave them to it. He used to keep in touch. He used to visit them. And when he couldn't visit them, he'd write them letters. But he had this network. We don't know exactly how it worked, but he seemed to know what was going on. And one of these was this group of Jesus followers in Colossae, that city in modern-day Turkey. Now, Colossae was a melting pot of different religions, ideas, and cultures, because it was in a central position. It was by the port. It was prosperous. And this particular community of Jesus followers were losing their way a bit. They were captivated by a whirlwind of strange and fascinating ideas that were flooding into the city, because so many different people from different religions and different philosophies were there. And they were interested in listening to these, but they began to drift away from the message of Jesus. And they began to drift away from putting Jesus at the center of their life. And you could see the impact of this. It was written all over their lifestyles. And it started to affect the life of the church, because they started arguing and were at odds with one another. And they weren't such a great example to people out there of what it is to follow Jesus. Now, Paul caught wind of this, and he penned a powerful letter, urging them to refocus on Jesus and put him at the center of their lives. He encouraged them to live as true followers of Jesus, as shining examples to the light of Jesus, showing his qualities in their day-to-day lives, putting him at the center of everything they do. And he uses this amazing picture of a transformation that Jesus brought about. He said, it's like getting rid of one old set of clothes and putting on another. And actually, if you lived in Colossae, you wouldn't have had that many set of clothes. You wouldn't have had a big wardrobe, just several set of clothes you have to keep constantly washing. Most of these people were poor, so this is a radical picture. And this is how he puts it. I'm going to give this to you in the Message version, because I love the way it puts this. Paul says, you're done with that old life. It's like a filthy set of ill-fitting clothes you've stripped off and put into the fire. Now you're dressed in a new wardrobe. Every item of your new way of life is custom made by the Creator with his label on it. That's a wonderful picture, and it kind of resonates with kind of modern day, doesn't it? Because labels are so important. It's so important to have the designer label, the right label. And Paul is saying here, actually, what you need is to have the creator's label on what you wear in your life. Not your clothes, but actually your attitudes and your conduct. So that people see that and they'll say, oh, that's God's label. That's a Jesus follower's label. And he pictures this transformation in a wonderful way and describes what these clothes look like. So in those verses that Sue read to us, I've just pulled one out of them. Therefore, as God's chosen people, and there they are in the middle of this city with all sorts of different ideas, philosophies and religions, and he reminds them of their identity. Remember, you belong to God. He's chosen you. You're his people. What a privilege you have. Holy, that means they're set apart. Dearly loved. Remember, it's not about you doing your best to be right with God, but because God loved you first. This is what you've got to do, he says. Clothe or cover yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's the wardrobe. And it's not a huge call. It's not asking us to do the impossible. And we can do this. And if we're Jesus followers, we can do this with his help. And if you're not a Jesus follower, call out for his help to do it. So today, we're going to focus on two of those qualities as we think about how we dress to impress, how we dress to make an impact on people for Jesus. Compassion and kindness. And we're going to work out how to wear your best self, the self that God wants you to be, the self that makes an impact on people, by clothing yourself with compassion and kindness. So these wonderful qualities are tied together. That's why I've put these together today. Other weeks we'll be doing, next week is humility, and we'll be doing each one as a singular one. But you can't really separate these two, because one flows from the other. Kindness flows from compassion. Now we think of compassion, as when we really care or concerned about people, and that's absolutely right. But I want to just bring you the meaning out of the original language, because actually it's a lot richer and deeper and more powerful. But the word translated as compassion in the Greek language that Paul wrote this in describes a deep empathy that you feel inside. It's something deep inside you, something that's real. In fact, now the word can describe bowels. When I think of bowels, I think of, well, I won't say what I think of, but in the Greek language, the bowels, it's deep within you, it's deeply felt. And it means that you make a connection with someone that runs really deep. You can feel sorry for someone, can't you? Sometimes people have said to me, I feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for you. It's like a friend of mine, he was a business person, and he used to travel all over the world in posh hotels. And if I went away, I used to go to Swanwick Conference Centre, or just stay in some 2-star hotel. And he said, you and I live in very different worlds, don't we? And what he was really saying was, I feel sorry for you. That's kind of looking down. This is different. This is standing alongside, and you really feel that for someone. Those of us who are parents, we know that. We know that when we feel something for our kids. My mum still reminds me of how unpopular. Would you believe I was unpopular at school? But my mum still tells me how upset she was. I wish she would tell me this. When everyone came out of school when I was about 5 years old with an invitation to a party, except me, And she really felt it. I didn't care particularly, but she felt it deep within, because she was my mum, she was my parent. So you identify with him, you feel it. And kindness flows from that, because you don't just feel something, but you put that compassion into action. You give them practical help. Now, I've got Ben's permission to tell you this, but I was quite challenged, actually, by Ben's conduct when we were at Atlanta Airport. I know he's a jet setter and he's used to travelling and he doesn't get so jet lagged as me. But we'd had a long flight. He'd been working right through the flight, exhausted. I was exhausted just sitting next to him in the plane, but he was doing emails right through the flight, doing all his work. And then he was still fresh as a daisy when we came out. And if you've ever been to America through their immigration, it's a nightmare. Yeah, it's a nightmare. You think, do you really want me in your country? Ladies and gentlemen, get in your queue. Do you really want to come here? Get out. Go back to England. I remember once I hadn't got an address right, and I can't remember how to put this address. It's not right. And the guy said, you go, sit in that corner until you get it right. So I hate it. I hate being an immigrant. It had been a long night. It was already about 10 o'clock at night their time. So goodness knows what it was our time. And I was really tired, thinking, I just want to get out of here. I want to get to bed. I want to get to sleep. And there was a little girl just by the side of us there. She wasn't very well at all. In fact, she was kind of, the Americans say she was bathing. I was thinking, this is the last thing I need. Now, there's me thinking that. Do you know what Ben was doing? He was saying, oh, that's terrible, isn't it? What can we do about that? Because the parents are all tied up. So Ben being Ben, they terrify me, the officials. He went up to the officials and he said, look, there's a little girl being sick there. Can you get her to the front of the queue? They, get back in the queue, sir, get back in the queue. And I said, well, you tried, didn't you? That wasn't good enough. He went down to someone else. And he carried on going until someone actually got them to the front of the queue. And I thought, I should have done that, shouldn't I? Yeah. But actually that really impressed me. And the contrast, actually, to be honest, because there was me thinking, the last thing I want is a child being sick next to me. But his concern was that deep compassion, as a parent, relating to those parents and the children and going to do something about it. Compassion and kindness. So each day, that's what we need to do. Choose to wear compassion from deep within and kindness. Choose to wear your best self. So, get ready with me. Remember that icon there, get ready with me, that routine. I want to help you to think about how you can wear your best self, which is compassion and kindness. So I'm going to give you a 5-step routine. I'm not going to kind of go on TikTok with it. But if I was on TikTok, this would be kind of my spiritual routine. And it's not just to start the day, it's to take you through the day based on those verses that we see. Firstly, you need to be real. Because there's a lot of pretense about, isn't there? I've travelled to Asia quite a bit, and I've often come back, with presents for Hazel, Jaeger scarves, Ralph Lauren. Was it Ralph Lauren? Ralph Lauren. What does Ralph Lauren make? Tops or something. And she said, when was Jaeger spelt with a Y? And she said, it's not Rolf Lauren, it's Ralph Lauren. And these amazing designer labels that I've got dirt cheap for about $2, what are they? They're fakes. They're knockoffs, and they fall to pieces in no time. But, we can be like that. We can be fakes. We can look like the real thing, but not. So we've really got to be real and have sincere compassion and kindness. So we need to make sure we don't settle for a cheap fate. Now, I said about the Forge Church, and I'm really grateful, actually, to some research that Rebecca had done on that, and she did a really great talk, and she kindly sort of gave me her research there. And she quoted a guy called Dr. Chris Germer. She's very clever. She quotes these kind of people. And he's an expert on compassion, and he talks about the far enemies and the near enemies of compassion. The near enemies are obvious. The things that undermine it, hatred, cruelty, indifference. We see it all around. We avoid those things, but the far enemies are more subtle. Because they're when we look genuine, but we're not. When we pretend to listen and pile on platitudes, but we don't really care. When we say we care, but actually we're judging them and thinking, haven't you got yourself in a mess, and we look down on them. When we're superficially nice, but we keep our distance. So at the beginning of the day, we need to say, my intention is to be real with people, just like Jesus was. And then we need to stand back. What I mean by stand back is don't jump to hasty conclusions. We used to have a friend at school. He used to jump to conclusions, and we told him. And one day, he turned around to my friend, and he jumped to another conclusion. He said, you're jumping to conclusions, aren't you? And he said, what? You mean you're jumping to conclusions about me jumping to a conclusion? But we do, don't we? We jump to conclusions about people. And we do it pretty quickly. If you see a lady or a man in the shop shouting at their kids, what do you think? Where do you come from? I won't say the place, Where do you come from? You don't come from round here, commoner's muck. You think, come on, we all think that, don't we? What a terrible mother. Hang on. Snap judgments are the enemy of compassion and kindness. They undermine it. We look down on people. How about trying to think what that mother may be feeling? She might be tired, anxious, ill. She might have had some really bad news. Her husband might have walked out with her, or a partner walked out on her. Now, another person that Rebecca quoted was Brené Brown. She's a social researcher, and I started doing some reading up about her, and she does some really great stuff about how to have compassion on people. This is something she said. She says, all I know is that my life is better when I assume that the people are doing their best. It keeps me out of judgment and lets me focus on what is and not what should or could be. I found that really helpful. It helps me to be less judgmental and more compassionate. Just think, actually, those people are doing their best with the situation they're in, with the things that they've been taught, with the poverty they're in, or whatever's happening to them. They're doing their best, and actually they need to be shown kindness and helped, a way through that, a way to develop on from that. I'll just give you an example of something that happened to me where I didn't do this. This was a long time ago. But I was in Victoria coach station, and I'd got the coach down from Chesterfield. I was doing a lot of travelling with Oak Hall, and I had to pay for my own journey to London, so I got the cheapest way I could, which was by coach. And then there'll be a coach there that I'd get on, which would go into Europe, and I did that wonderful all-night journey on coach, which I hated, but still, it was great privilege. But when we were on the coach from Chesterfield, there was this old gentleman who was really confused. And he thought he was going to Asia, and he had a passport. And I was really quite worried about him. And as we got off, I went to one of the staff who was supposed to be helping people, and I said, look, I'm really worried about this man. And then this man came along and said, I want to go to Heathrow Airport. And he said, yes, sir, if you just go out through there to the tube station, get whatever line it was you'd go. And I said, actually, this guy's really confused. We need to get him help. And he said, no, he's all right. He wants to go to Heathrow Airport. And I just said, don't be too helpful. And it really kind of like provoked something. He went, excuse me, what did you just say? And I said, no, sorry, I was just being a bit sarcastic. And it really seemed to irk him. And actually, it was provident. What happened in the end was he called these two PCSOs, police community officers, over, and he said, excuse me, this man's being rude to me. And he was really worked up. And I said, actually, while you're here, could you help this old gentleman? I'm really worried about him. That diffused it. And I said to him, look, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. Will I shake your hand? He said, I am not shaking your hand. And I thought, oh, well, I thought it's time for a complaint. I'm one of those complainants. So I went to customer services, and I said, I've had a real problem with that man over there. Now, this is where I kind of felt, and she said, I'm really sorry. Tell me what happened. I explained. And she said, look, I need to tell you something. This man lost his wife last week. He should never have come back to work, but he insisted, and obviously it's all blown up. I said, well, okay, this isn't take the complaint away, but please give him some help. And they said, we're going to have to send him home. We're going to have to get him some help. But do you see how I judged that situation there? But actually, in that situation, that guy was really doing the best he could do. He'd lost his wife. He was grief-stricken. All he wanted to do was just do the mechanics of his job, and he didn't know how to help that poor guy who was confused. All he could do is tell him directions to the tube. He was doing his best. And actually, if I'd have just made that assumption, I'd have had a completely different outlook and maybe handled that situation differently. Now, it doesn't mean we make excuses for people. It doesn't mean, they do what they want and walk all over us. We set boundaries, but we can reach out a hand to help them and to move forward. Then the next thing we need to do is to show up, which is harder than it sounds. And by showing up, I mean that we stand with them in their grief and their difficulty. Now, that might sound natural, but let's be honest. When someone's going through a hard time, there is part of us that wants to not be compassionate, that wants to run away because we're overwhelmed. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to handle it ourselves, so we back away. And if you've been there, don't condemn yourself. It's an instinctive reaction. We feel overwhelmed, fearful, or unsure how to respond. I've been there. Let me be vulnerable with you about this. I had a friend, a dear friend, who I've known for years and years and years. I led him to the Lord and got this message. And I was going through I was clinically depressed at the time. This was 10 years ago. And we got this message via the phone. Our beautiful daughter, Kerry, has died suddenly. 3 weeks after a wedding. Her husband found her dead. And, I did send them a message and everything, but I just backed away. I still feel ashamed that I just backed away. I should have been a friend to him, but I backed away. I wasn't there for him. So don't condemn yourself, but just be determined in the future to be present. No backing off, no hiding away. Face it head on with those standing in pain. And then be present. And by that, don't be distracted. Listen to what people say. When someone shares a struggle with you, resist the urge to offer them quick advice or cliches. Understand what they're saying. Be there for them. And if you can't help, well, you can guide them to someone else, but be present for them. The band come up now as we look at the last point. Start small. Tomorrow morning, as you get dressed, I want you to decide on one act of kindness and one act of compassion to perform. I don't know, overload you. Just think of one thing you can do. Look out for one thing. And at the end of the day, reflect on how those actions impacted your day and your interaction. Did they bring about positive change? Did they radiate the love of Jesus? And if you're not a Jesus follower, how different did that make your life? And how will that point you towards knowing more about Jesus? Because it's through him we can radiate these things. So get ready with me. Wear your best self, which is kindness and compassion. Choose your attitude with as much care as you choose your outfits. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word and for Jesus' perfect example of kindness and compassion. Help us to clothe ourselves with these qualities. Transform our hearts and minds to reflect your love. And I pray for any who don't know you today, that they will take that first step to want to know your kindness and compassion in their life, to have their lives transformed. In the name of Jesus, amen.